COVID-19 and how we've been responding. And then I'll be introducing Lane. Lane will speak for a while, has some images to share with us and some stories. After that, there'll be a question and answer period. Joe has mentioned that if you have questions, please put them in the chat, and then we can go through those at the end, whether they are about Wolf Ridge or if they're about Lane's topics of ecosystem services and things like that. I would look forward to the discussion that follows. If we get too many question answers, we'll do our best and send out answers via email to the whole group tonight. Again, this is just a joy. Thank you for coming this evening, attending this Zoom event. That Wolf Ridge, as you all know, is a place where learning happens in community. That happens gathered together on this ridgetop where I sit right now. And of course, that is about the polar opposite of social distancing. And that what we do here is bringing people together from communities, from different generations, from all over the state, the region, the world. And as you can imagine, for Wolf Ridge, as an update goes, this has been a very trying time. That normally in October, we'd be awash in school children, their teachers and parents, hundreds of them a week throughout the entire school year. Weekends would have family or adult programs. We would have followed this summer that would have been wilderness trips with summer camps for families, for youth who are growing up outdoors, and Wolf Ridge is helping to provide that environmental ethic. As you can imagine, none of that has occurred in the past months. March 13th was the last date in which we had students here. And we did not have any summer programs, and we do not have any programs here on site to speak of. I'll mention a few that we're doing, but through 2020, we just aren't able to gather here at the Ridge together. That we have hopes for early 2021 for schools being able to return. Ironically, we actually have a small school group here that just arrived today, but it is a boarding school where the staff and kids live together. So it is a rather unique condition for us to be able to welcome a school here that happens to have arrived just today. But other than that, in the springtime, we took the time to respond with our Adventures in Learning, is what we termed it, an online series of events that could help to drive children and their families outdoors. And if you look on the web, you can search for our Adventures in Learning and on topics from watersheds to environmental nature artwork. And actually they were viewed and engaged with by over 11,000 people all over the world. So even though some organizations, or we could have chosen to hibernate during the past 6-7 months, we have actually been raising our capacity, rising up, figuring out new ways to meet our mission. Besides some online work, we are doing some teacher coaching, visiting schools and helping teachers learn to teach outdoors and do that more effectively. We are also doing a bit of work here on site. We are working to welcome some day use activities on site. We're working around the North Shore at local resorts, doing some day use environmental education work. And we just started a new partnership with the Grand Portage Tribal School, Oshki Ogimag, where we are doing a once-a-day environmental science class all outdoors. And so our mission work is still continuing. It just doesn't look like the gathering that typically would occur up on the Ridge. That our grad student program that people know well, and there are some alums here with us this evening, I'm sorry to say we could not do the fall session. We are considering the possibilities of a winter spring, waiting to see how all that comes together. That I do have some exciting news, as I know there are people on here that have followed our Making Waves campaign. And with that, in our Making Waves campaign, that the last few years we were adding a graduate student housing facility and renovating our original dorm. For those alums on there, the West Dorm, where you lived upstairs, and for some of the teachers that I know on here, your children and you stayed in that West Dorm. That West Dorm has now been renovated to what's called the Margaret Cargill Lodge. And what was unique about both of these buildings, they were built to the highest international standards of sustainability one can achieve in the world. This is something called the Living Building Challenge, and full certification of the Living Building Challenge is going way above LEED Platinum. Well, you know our climate. This is not the most easy place in the world to do things like net zero energy. And just yesterday, I finished a long phone call with the folks at Living Building Challenge. And I'm excited to tell those that have helped us and followed Wolf Ridge through this, our biomass energy plant, where we have just switched to 100% post-consumer waste fiber, avoiding landfills, going to waste stream, EPA compliant combustion, we have just been approved for net zero energy off of that heating and that system. That was the biggest challenge looking at Living Building Challenge. It now appears we are on a solid path to full certification, which is different compared to LEED. LEED, you just have a checklist that you go through. Living Building Challenge, you have to prove for in 12 months that you actually are net zero energy, net zero water. It now looks very favorable that we will reach that certification. We'll be the first in the state, in the 4-state area, and approximately 25th, somewhere 25th to 30th in the world to do so with our Mac Lodge building. And I'm so excited for things like that, to have students soon return to Wolf Ridge, where they can begin to immerse themselves not only in outdoor learning, but in learning a lifestyle that they can live a little more lightly on this planet. And that lifestyle and that living laboratory of learning is what really we are all about. And I look forward to the day when we can return to having those kids here. A few more things, and then I'm going to hand it over to Lane. Is, I would say, the most common question I've had asked to me in the last months has been, Peter, how is Wolf Ridge doing? How are you surviving this? As folks may recall, we are a nonprofit, and we're an 87% earned income nonprofit, which means no income, or about 90% income has disappeared. And this is a very challenging time, but people have stepped up. We've come up with some creative ways to drive some new efforts here in education and earn a little bit of money here and there. And I'm proud to tell you, Wolf Ridge will certainly and solidly survive. There is no question in my mind. Even if we can't make it through the school year not having any students, we will make it through this. Back in H1N1, we started putting away a little bit of money. We have a small cash reserve, but I'm here to tell you that with the generosity of many people, the benefits of a PPP loan, and some difficult decisions about programming and operations, we have made it thus far 7 months without having to dip into any reserves or into any new additional debt. I'm proud of the team here. We are raising up and we are meeting this challenge very effectively. And again, not hibernating, but actually raising our capacity. A few people know this. I just need to let folks know that some of those difficult decisions about financial management, we did end up cutting a tremendous amount of the staff. About 2/3 of the staff were cut and we're in layoffs now. And yet, as soon as we can bring schools back, we bring back the staff and we'll be up and running again at full tilt. So I'm proud to tell you that we are here still educating, rising up to meet challenges in all sorts of new ways, developing new capacities as we look to a really bright future and a 50th year that will arrive here in September of 2021. With that, I want to introduce Lane, or whom I know as Lane, Dr. Elena Bennett. And Lane and I go back quite a few years. And I'm proud to say, as part of my introduction, that I first know her as a friend and a colleague and an educator. And she came to Wolf Ridge many years ago and was in our graduate student naturalist training program. And in that capacity taught, about 2,300 students approximately while here at Wolf Ridge. She was a joy to work with, a passionate, dedicated educator that changed the lives of thousands of children. And I'm proud to bring her back here today. And just a little bit of information about Lane, that she received her BA from Oberlin College in Ohio, and her MS and her PhD from University of Wisconsin, her PhD in limnology and marine sciences. She's the co-chair of the International Project on Eco-Services, aiming to set the research agenda for ecosystem services for the coming decade, and is the lead author on the IPBES, if you can describe that acronym as needed, of the global assessment. That she's been a Leopold Leadership Fellow, a Trotter Public Policy Professor. She is a professor at McGill University and is an award-winning professor in her undergraduate teaching, her graduate supervisions, and also in campus sustainability. And I'm excited to learn from her this evening because her focus is in ecosystem services, something we all rely on for food, for fiber, for shade in the forest, for recreation, for climate stability. And her work is really focused on ecosystem services and how, as I understand it, that if we focus too much in one direction, we may leave something else very vulnerable. And that is what I'm excited to learn about this evening from Dr. Elena Bennett. Welcome, Lane.
Thanks, Mud. That's so sweet. I was just thinking as we're talking about how many students that I taught when I was at Wolf Ridge and changing their lives. And it's funny because my conception of being at Wolf Ridge, it has all of those students and all of those teachers there, but the way I remember it is how much Wolf Ridge changed my life. So there's lots of things going on there, I think, at once.
I'm going to stop you
So
for a second, Lane.
yeah,
Now that I've made you host so that you can share
yes.
your slides, it doesn't seem that you're spotlighted. And I bet you other people are struggling to see who you are right now.
Okay. So am
So,
I going to go away when I share my slides anyway?
oh, possibly, but we want to see you too. I don't quite know. So I don't know how to take the spotlight off of Pete Smerud.
Do I have to give it
Um,
away, Joe?
how's that?
Hey,
There, now you're there. You're brilliant. Now I'm going back
Okay.
away.
So then what I need to do is play the slideshow, and then I need to come back here and I need to share my screen. And hopefully we tried this before and there was a couple second delay. So hopefully there's a couple second delay and Smud's going to give me the thumbs up when he sees some slides.
Lane, it is, hey, I see trees and a little sunrise.
Awesome. Great. Okay, so I'm going to jump right in, and I'll just start by saying it is such an honor to be able to be doing this. I appreciate, Smud, that you didn't say how long ago I was at Wolf Ridge, because it was a long time, and it makes me feel old to think about that. But it was a really, really meaningful time in my life, and so it's just delightful to be invited back to kick off this this series of talks. So what I want to invite you to do is to just relax for a moment. You can stare at the screen, you can close your eyes, you can just have a moment to think. And I'm going to ask you to think about a particular thing. In particular, I'd like you to picture the environment that you expect on Earth about 50 years from now. So that would be the year 2070. I want you to think about what you see when you look around, what you smell, maybe what you hear. And what I'm curious about is whether you see something like the image you have in front of you, lush green fields, dark, fragrant woods, they're filled with bird song, maybe a beautiful lake, maybe Lake Superior. Maybe the air is filled with kids laughing as they're skipping stones across the surface of Lake Superior. Or maybe, if you're following the news these days, you are picturing a giant patch of plastic garbage in the Pacific Ocean, or bleached out coral reefs, or a forest that's lost all of its biodiversity, or even just suburban sprawl, as far as you can see. And I get that. I think when we think about the environment these days and the future of the planet, it is plenty disheartening. We are bombarded with images like this one of dystopian visions of collapse and degradation, and by news about how bad things are and how much worse they're going to get. And I don't want to downplay that, even though I'm going to turn us pretty quickly in another direction. It is important to be aware of some of the problems that we're causing by not living lightly enough on the planet. But what I do want to point out is that when we just extrapolate the current bad trends, we run the risk of setting ourselves up for a self-fulfilling bad future. So we know, for example, that people choose their actions based on what they believe about society and what they expect for the future. So I think of it like steering a car or steering a bike. If you turn your head to look at something, you're going to steer towards that thing. So if the only images we have in front of us are images like this one, then we're likely to steer towards that negative future, even if we know that it's the future that we don't want. So I want to steer away from that and convey to you tonight my vision of the future, which is that it doesn't have to be bleak. And I want to talk a little bit about the role of places like Wolf Ridge in making it suitably not bleak or suitably good. So scientists use this term Anthropocene or Anthropocene to mean the era dominated by people. It's not an official epoch like the Holocene or the Pleistocene, but it's a term that we use to just indicate the level of impact that people are having on the planet. It was popularized by Paul Crutzen, who was a Nobel Prize winner in chemistry, and it's picked up steam since he first introduced the term in about the year 2000. So maybe before I get into the Holocene, I'll take a step back. This is the only graph I'm going to show, but it's an important one, and I just want to step back and talk a little bit about the Holocene so that we can think about why the Anthropocene is so different. So let me walk you through this. So this axis here, and it's telling us this is delta 18 oxygen. And what you need to know is that that's a way that scientists measure what we think the climate was like millions or thousands of years ago. And we do that by looking at bubbles that are trapped in ice cores. So at the very far end, we're looking at 100,000 years ago and walking our way over towards today. And what you should notice is that climate here just bounces around up and down and up and down, and the downs cause things to happen. So this down causes people to migrate out of Africa, and we get other migrations and other changes in climate. And then we get this. That's the last 11,000 years with almost no bouncing around whatsoever. That is the epoch that we call the Holocene. And it is remarkably stable. It's unlike anything else that we've ever seen before on the planet. It is incredibly stable, and everything that you know about human civilization happens during that time. So that's the Greek civilization, that's the Romans, that's the Renaissance, that's everything happens during that period of stability. That we have there, truly a special time. And so now we find ourselves walking out of that Holocene into a completely different epoch, an epoch of human impact. And that might be human impact like I'm showing here on these slides, where people, even going back to the Native Americans that lived in southern parts of Minnesota, would have been periodically burning grasslands to keep them in prairie in order to keep species around that they wanted to hunt or otherwise collect. Or it can mean other sorts of human impacts, the kinds that we see around us now, building cities, causing flooding through climate change, the plastic that I talked about before, or just denuding. And many of the things that we're doing on the planet are indeed bad news. But what I want to focus on tonight is, does it have to be that way? Does it have to be terrible, or can we have that fabulous Anthropocene? And to me, that is all about the question of, in what direction lies hope? And so I want to spend a little bit of time talking about a new project that I've been working on these days to sort of bring together some of my work on ecosystem services with this question of hope and where hope is. And so what we see when we look around is that actually, as people notice problems, as they look around and see that we're harvesting too much timber, that we're covering beaches in plastic, that we're building too many cities, as people notice those problems, they start taking action, doing things to make their worlds better. Engaging with the Living Building Challenge is a great example of that. And so it occurred to me that if I wanted to think about how to bring about a better Anthropocene, a better future for the planet, that maybe I needed to look at the things that people were already doing to make the world around them better and treat those as if they were the future, as if the future was already here, just unevenly distributed, as William Gibson likes to say. What happens if those things, if the Living Building Challenge becomes not a thing that just Wolf Ridge is doing, but a thing that everybody's doing? So let me give you an example. I think actually Wolfridge is a great example of a seed, but or a bright spot, but let me give you another example. This is a project called Health in Harmony, and they're actually working in Indonesian Borneo. And it was started by a doctor who got very worried about this part of the world and worried about the orangutans that were going extinct there. And she figured out a way basically to get her doctor friends to help her offer free or low-cost healthcare to communities that committed to stopping deforestation. And the reason she did that was in talking to people and in doing what she calls radical listening, she realized that people weren't cutting down the forest out of greed. They were cutting down the forest because their mom needed medical treatment or their child needed school books. And that people really were lacking access to medical care. And she could provide that in exchange for them saving the forest. And they have had remarkable success. So they have seen now a decrease in illegal logging of about 90% and an increase in every aspect of human health that they measure, including reduction in infant mortality rates. So that's an example of the kind of thing I mean when I say a bright spot. And we also call them seeds because they're sort of like seeds of this better future that are growing. And we've collected about 500 of those from all around the world. And so we're just seeing a few of the dots, and the locations aren't important. So you might notice, for example, that there's none in Australia. And that doesn't actually mean that there's no bright spots in Australia. It just means that me and my scientific colleagues haven't gotten there to ask people yet. So we have a lot more in the areas that we're working. And so you can see, for example, that I'm based in Montreal, and that my other closest colleagues on this project are based in Sweden and in South Africa and in India. And so we have a lot more around the areas that we live, but it's a good sign that these exist all over the place. And we're using these to do a bunch of different things. So we're using these to understand what people want in a better world, in a better Anthropocene. We're using them to understand what pathways we can use to get from where we are now to a better Anthropocene. And we're using them to understand how to make these projects more successful. Why do some grow and thrive and even spread, and others don't? So we can use these scientifically in all sorts of different ways. One of the ways that I'm most excited about is about storytelling, because I was telling you earlier that we steer in the direction that we're looking. And part of that is because stories are just incredibly powerful in pointing our heads different directions. They actually even create our reality as much as they help us to explain it. So it's really important that we have stories, or as we call them in the science world, we call them scenarios, and we build sets of them to go together. But it's really important that we have these stories that help us point in the direction we want to go and help us think about what are the steps we need to take to get from where we are now to where it is we want to go. And so let me talk a little bit about some of the things that we're learning by looking at these seeds or at these bright spots. So one of the things that we notice right away is what people want in their better future. And people want a couple of things in particular. The things that come up over and over and over again are people want to reconnect to community, they want to reconnect to nature, and they want to reconnect to themselves, actually. And those things come up over and over again, and they're very interlinked. So sometimes someone will say to me, well, I started this project because I was trying to reconnect to nature. I was trying to restore this small patch of unused land under a railroad trestle. And then it turned out that my community came out to help, and we got to know each other. And then we started improving our local schools, and we started doing this and we started doing that. So there's something about these reconnections that cause other reconnections to happen, even though we don't know how that works yet. And places like Wolf Ridge have a really important role in all three types of those connections. And so let me talk a little bit about at least what I saw when I was at Wolf Ridge in terms of those three kinds of connections. So let me start with connecting to nature. This is, I think, at least for me, it's what I think of right away when I think about what Wolf Ridge does. We take kids and teachers and parent chaperones who might not get a chance to get out into nature and bring people out there. And we teach them about what it is that they're seeing. Maybe that's about phenology. Maybe that's about stars. Maybe that's about water or plants or other species or animals that live in the region. And so that is serving two purposes. It's learning important facts about the world around us, and it's connecting people to nature as we're learning those important facts. Let me talk about connecting people to people. I think this is a magical thing that Wolf Ridge is able to do. And I collected some pictures from off of the web of different students and schools who've come to visit Wolf Ridge over the years. There are all different kinds of schools and students of many different ages coming to visit. And it's a really special experience, not only to get out into nature, but to be together doing that and learning how to communicate with one another, how to talk, how to listen, how to work together, and how to have an impact on each other. And I think I was at some point recently telling Joe and Smud this story about coming back to Wolf Ridge to visit. I don't know how many years after I was there, maybe 6 or 7 years after I had been there as a student naturalist, maybe a little bit longer, and driving up the North Shore, and I stopped to put gas in my car, and the kid at the checkout looked at me, tilted his head the other way and said, "Are you Lane?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm Lane." And he said, "Oh my goodness, you were my student naturalist when I was at Wolf Ridge. I loved being there. Let me tell you about," and I got a 15-minute spiel of all the things that this kid had learned half of his lifetime ago when he had come to visit Wolf Ridge. So a really special place in terms of connecting people to one another. And then finally, connecting people to themselves. I think we all learn something about ourselves when we push ourselves to do more and to do better. And to have a place where we can do that and have fun is really a precious thing. Okay, so 3 things people want to do. They want to connect to each other. They want to connect to nature, and they want to connect to themselves. And a special place that we have in Wolf Ridge, and that it's helping students to do all of those things. So besides connections, what else are we learning from our project that people want in a better future? And I wanted to talk just about a couple of topics that come up repeatedly as really important. And I've picked these ones out in particular because they're, again, things that Wolf Ridge has chosen to focus in on. Many of those have been chosen even really since I was there, or have become a greater focus since I was there, which is really, really fun to see. And those are things like clean water and better sourcing of food. So the sort of better ways of providing for ourselves. So food and water are 2 critical ecosystem services or benefits that we get from nature. And they just come up over and over again as being important things that people want to see in a better future. They want to see us able to get the food and the water that we need without destroying other things. And then another thing that comes up over and over again that I think is really important is people are looking for ideas and inspirations of ways to live a little bit lighter on the land. And that's a place that I think things like the Living Building Challenge, the certified net zero energy and net zero water building, that are not only sort of sitting at the cutting edge of what it's possible to do, but doing that in a way that is exposing thousands of people to how you do that, to the fact that it's possible, to the ability to come and see it and learn about it and ask questions about it and think, could I do that? Okay, so let me talk a little bit about stories. I won't talk very much longer. So in the world of science, we use storytelling in a really particular way. And what we do is we talk about scenarios. And scenarios are really just stories. They have a sort of logical plot and a narrative that govern the manner in which things unfold. And what we're doing with our project is we're starting with these seeds over here on the left, and we figure out how to grow them into different kinds of futures. So we say, well, if these are the seeds you're interested in, maybe it's Living Building Challenge, and it's clean water, and it is better gender relations, or better approaches to diversity and racism. And then we can walk those stories into the future and think about the pathways that we need to take to get to those futures. And it turns out that that's really important for helping us to build resilience. So when things aren't going well, or things are changing suddenly, we need the ability to deal with that change, to adapt, to do something different. We need to be ready to make those kinds of changes. And it turns out that thinking through what the future might bring, and different kinds of alternatives and different ways that we can cope with those alternatives, helps us to build that kind of resilience. It helps us to be faster on our feet. I think of it sometimes like it's like playing a sport, and you're standing up on your toes instead of standing back on your heels. And what the storytelling does is get us up on those toes so that we're ready to act. And that's really important right now, as we see that we're going through a massive global pandemic that is changing a lot of things. And we're finding in all sorts of ways that we need to be ready to act quickly to adapt to that future. And so Smud asked me to talk at least a little bit about the COVID pause and what kinds of impacts we see that that's having. So I'll do that just briefly. And scientifically, I think what we see is some things actually reacted very quickly to the COVID pause. So this is, I lied, this is another graph. I forgot this one was coming. So this is another graph. And this is showing the NO2 emissions in China in January, so before we had the shutdown there, and then in February after they shut down. And you can see this dramatic decline in NO2 in the atmosphere, which is a critical pollutant. So some things like this that change really quickly, like air pollution, did change really quickly. Now, I don't have a graph of what this looks like today, but it's unfortunately a lot more like this graph on the left. When things opened up, we kind of went right back to where we were. On the flip side, things that changed slowly, like greenhouse gas emissions, changed a little bit because we traveled less, there were fewer airplanes, but they didn't change that much. So we get quick changes that change back to where they were quickly, and slower changes that hopefully will be slower to return also. There are just a couple of thoughts about that. So let me come back a little bit to the importance of stories and scenarios and thinking about the future, and to the importance, in my mind anyway, of places that help us to see what that better future might look like, places that inspire us with all that they're able to do, places like Wolf Ridge. This is one of my favorite quotes that I ran into up here in Montreal by a famous French writer. You might know him as the author of Le Petit Prince, or The Little Prince. This is from a different book. And what he says is, if you want to build a ship, don't start with collecting wood, cutting the planks, and assigning work, but awaken people a longing for the wide and open sea. And so I just want to end by pointing out all that Wolf Ridge and places like Wolf Ridge are doing to do this, to bring kids into nature, to provide inspiration by seeing how beautiful that nature is, to provide ways to connect with it, to connect with each other, and to see, well, how to cut planks and why that might be important if we are, in fact, longing for the wide and open sea. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I think I need to hand the meeting back to Joe, and we can take questions. Joe, can you take the hostship back?
Of course not. It worked for us in practice, but I can't find that button anymore.
Okay. Let's see what I can do here. Hang on. How about that?
Aha, I'm the host now. I'm in charge.
Okay. So I'm more than happy to answer questions about either ecosystem services or Anthropocene or Good Anthropocene. And I think Pete and Joe can answer questions about Wolf Ridge. We are at your service.
And note, if you want to put something in the chat, please do. I'm watching it, but if somebody just wants to raise their hand, that we can call on you that way. But Joe, then I need to see the gallery view as opposed to a spotlight on me.
Sure. There we go. So now we should have gallery and be able to see all the smiling faces out there. Russ, you're supposed to be smiling. Thank you very much, sir. So it looks like we might have a question here. And frankly, if somebody wanted to just ask the question with their own voice, that'd be fine. But I'll bet you that Lane can even see that question.
I can see that one. That's great. So as the question, I'll just read it just in case everyone else isn't looking at the chat, is, as a limnologist, how do you see the possibilities of Lake Superior as a classroom? I mean, to me, Lake Superior is just amazing. I was not a limnologist yet when I was at Wolf Ridge, and I still wonder if being there and being on the shore of Lake Superior was part of what led me in that direction. It certainly wasn't something I'd thought about before that, but there are amazing things that we can do with Lake Superior, both in terms of the abstract of thinking about how important water quality is, but also how we manage water, the importance of water quality in our lives, the importance of water for all sorts of things, right? You can see the shipping boats going across Lake Superior. It's amazing. Okay, should I just keep going?
Sure. Keep going.
Okay. I'm getting the nod. So then the next question was, since my time at Wolf Ridge, what additions are the most surprising to you? what is the most surprising? Maybe the farm, I think, might be the most surprising because there were things like building and heating and energy that seemed on people's mind even. So I will say now, I was at Wolf Ridge in 1994 and 1995. And even at that time, I think that was on people's mind. But I don't remember food being on people's mind, but it really is at the cutting edge. So I now teach at an agricultural school, and sort of food and farming, all the students who come through, that's a huge interest for them, is organic farming and CSAs, and how can I do farm to table? And we're just seeing it grow everywhere. And so it's one of those ways that I think Wolf Ridge is at the cutting edge. And my gut feeling about Lake Superior and Lake Superior as sort of a possible site where you could do a lot is, I think that's what's coming next. I think it's like, once again, Wolf Ridge is like just ahead of the curve on what's going on. And I'm waiting to see what you guys do so that I can know what I'm going to be teaching next and what it feels like. Okay, I'm still going. In your first graph, why did climate rise and then stay steady about 11,000 years ago? And so was it human impact, or were there other factors? And so there are, in fact, other factors. Some of that is a little bit people, but a lot of that is about the path that Earth is taking around the sun, and the combination of the wobble of the Earth and the directionality kind of led to that. But what we are seeing now over that long time period is that we probably would be, and I'm talking over thousands of years, we probably would be heading into actually a mini ice age now, just given sort of planetary systems, if it weren't for climate change. And climate change is clearly going to take us well out of any sort of mini ice age, and much, much faster. That mini ice age would come on over the course of a few thousand years. And meanwhile, we're going to bring on climate change over the course of a few decades at most. Okay, so I hope I answered that one. Okay, so more detail about how I'm applying what I do now, like how I'm using this project. I hope that's what that means. So we are trying to work with leaders, for example, in Montreal, about how Montreal, and actually McGill too, which is the university where I teach, how can they create more fertile ground for more of these seeds? So what can governments and communities do to make it easier for places, for projects like that to thrive? What do places need in order to be more successful? And then the other thing that I'm doing that I didn't talk about tonight, but I can talk about some or provide information about, is I'm have a project all across Canada where we're actually working with local decision makers to help provide information that they need about better decision making. So one example is in Nova Scotia, the Department of Agriculture manages about 80 kilometers of dikes that have been there for hundreds of years. The first European settlers, I should say, put these dikes in to keep the seawater out and to grow food. And the Department of Agriculture can't afford to maintain them. They can maintain about half of them. And so we're working with them to provide the information about how do you decide which ones to take out? If you take out some, you're going to lose recreation or gain agriculture, and who wins and who loses. And so it turns out we can provide all the science and build different scenarios, and then they can look at the different scenarios and say, oh, we like this one the best. That's a good pathway for us, or we like that one the best. Okay,
Hey,
still going.
Yeah,
Yes.
as you read Michelle's question right there, part of it is related to maybe getting access to your lab's website, Bright Spots,
Mhm.
maybe a link to your TED Talk, those types of things. And I wonder if maybe you could send me things that I could disperse to everybody.
Yes, I
Sure.
can definitely do that. And there's plenty of places to go, and my email is on all of those sites. So if you want to reach out and ask me other questions or just find out more or whatever, I'm very open to that. And it's probably better to do. I had the thought of typing it in the chat, but then I'm going to get distracted with trying to type in the chat box, and I better focus on what I'm doing here. Okay, so that was more detail on what I'm doing. The American Institute of Architects is trying hard to get design firms to submit data to inform energy and water reductions, carbon footprint, but not seeing a rapid response to help and or reduce. And they've introduced a resilience and adaptability certification course. Is this a plan B? Now that's an interesting idea. I mean, I guess I can see why, right? It's extra work for a design firm to do that, but it sure would be nice for it to be mandated somehow that would have to be done. But at least if you had to do a resilience and adaptability, it would get you somewhere. I would be really interested to know more about what's in that resilience and adaptability course and sort of what that
Lane, if you look further down, Mike Liner has posted a link to that AIA report. Later
That's
on,
actually, yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. The report is actually the numbers that firms submitted for 2019, showing that they're not going to make their AIA 2030 target for reducing greenhouse gases. And when I was trying to take some continuing education classes, I found this adaptability and resiliency course series, and I started reading it, and it said, okay, well, looks like we're not going to stop climate change fast enough, so let's start designing buildings to be able to withstand the climate that's now going to be thrown at them versus trying to stop the climate from doing that, which is a real shame, but now we have to start thinking about that. And if, if rivers are going to flood, I live in a Stillwater where a river now floods almost annually. And so don't go put buildings in flood zones. So nature is pushing back because we are messing it up. And you mentioned the word resilience, and that's what triggered this thought in my head. Having the bright future, the hope is great, but I don't know if we can just stand back and not start designing the resiliency in. If we could get people to react to your scenarios and your logical plan forward fast enough, I think we'll be fine. But
hey, Mike and Elaine, let me give you an example of that living building challenge has been a subject that's been thrown out there. And that doing this at Wolf Ridge, we did the demolition to this entire West Storm, this large building. And the goal is 90% landfill diversion. And so recycle everything, reuse everything. And a great example, I think, of designing for resiliency, we struggled to find places to put the sheetrock we tore out of the building. Easy to do that with the sheetrock that had no paint on it. Struggled with the sheetrock that had paint on it, because what are the ingredients in the paint? That was the big concern. Whereas now, you go with a living building that has vetted the materials for their ingredients. Now we know there are no toxic chemicals in the paint that's on a living building project. Therefore, in the future, when it comes time to recycle that building, renovate, whatever the case may be, we're at a place where we don't have to mine gypsum necessarily for new sheetrock, or oftentimes recycled sheetrock doesn't end up as more sheetrock. But the idea being that we are building in that ability that we don't have to extract resources as readily as opposed to reuse resources that are already in the human usage streams.
yeah, that's a great example.
Yeah.
Yeah, it strikes me that, the resilience, the sort of adaptation to climate change is certainly going to be important because we've already walked ourselves enough down that path that there's no turning back from at least a degree or so of change and some more significant storms. But I sure hope that we don't only go that route. That seems
Right.
like it would be a really sad end, would be to just say, well, we're just gonna only adapt. I really think we need to
Yeah.
start moving now, and as much as the federal government lately has not been doing much in that direction, I do see states and individuals and cities are stepping up and taking action. And often that's putting in place regulations or rules or changes to tax law that essentially steer people down the path that we need them to go down to do more mitigation up front.
Well, it depends if we get a leader that will mandate the right things and not take away the mandates that are mandating the good things. And yeah, that's, accessibility for buildings for people with disabilities. Until it was mandated, very few buildings made their buildings accessible. Very few organizations made their buildings accessible because, in some cases it was costly. And until people mandate some of these energy saving things, and a lot of them have been mandated, but not far enough to meet the goals that we need to hit. So,
Yeah, and accessibility isn't mandated in Canada, and it's a big issue for us here. And there was a question about politicians in Canada and whether they value science. When I first moved up here, which was in 2005, the government was actually severely muzzling scientists, very actively telling scientists what they could and could not say. It was grim, and scientists held what did they call it? The March for Truth. I would have to look up what the name was, but scientists basically marched on Ottawa for truth, and essentially created a sort of revolution that led to a new election and a new government. So, I would say right now science is valued here, but it has not always been the case. And I like that story because it shows that change is possible.
That sort of addresses a bit of Russ's question about do politicians in Canada value science more than those in the US? And then Nancy had the last comment there about certification, resilience, and adaptation. Any last comments, Lane? And then I'll finish us up.
Yeah, I have the certification, shocks and hazards. Yeah, okay, so so it's not necessarily certification just about climate and environment, but a sort of broader resilience or different kind of resilience. No, I will just say thank you again. I'll get some links and things to Joe for anyone who wants to learn more, and I just appreciate the chance to be able to come talk with you all.
Yeah, and Michelle, I want to touch on that in particular, is that I will get you that stuff because I agree with you about the research on hope, and Lane really sets that up really nicely. So I'll get that to you.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you this evening for attending. I am going to end with the thanks to Lane, to our sponsors tonight, North Star Financial and Haddad Consulting. But I also want to end with a request for your help. That as this has been a very challenging time for Wolfridge. And as I look around the names on the screens in here, I can see the names. I know that the vast number of you on this Zoom event tonight are already donors and supporting Wolfridge. And for those that are not, please consider helping us. Joe, can you please put a link in the chat here for the link to give? We have a special giving page set up just for this 50th series. And that we, as you can imagine, that it's going to be nearly a year of no students on site, our losses are going to be in about $2.5 million worth of revenue. And yet, look at what we've done thus far to make it this far without having to dip into reserves or any debt that would really penalize and hold Wolfridge in a tough pitch situation. To be able to be active and ready, as Lane said, to take action and to provide those bright spots of hope. So please go to the link and please consider giving tonight. And if you are already somebody who's recently given, please consider in opening the network for us. Reach out to your friends or colleagues that really value the type of work we do and work that produces people like Lane Bennett. And that it is not just her, but thousands of children and others. The link is now up there, wolfridge50ss.campbraingiving.com. If you click right there, it is very simple to make that entry and do so this evening. If you have questions about giving, there are people on this call right now that are in our Leaders of the Pack, which is our planned giving group, that have made estate gifts or bequests that really is the ultimate in assuring that the values you see and hold dear in society will be extended into the future. And by helping us perpetuate your values as you leave the earth, that we go forward carrying that message. And Wolfridge wants to do that for so many people. So please consider that as we end the year and you are looking at your philanthropy, please consider support that will help us be ready to provide those bright spots of hope and model whether it's the future of fresh water and how we consider it on this planet and treat it down at our new Lake Superior property that we've just broken ground on not long ago, whether it's sustainability with Living Building Challenge, local foods and organic foods being raised right here on our site at our farm, or connecting thousands of thousands to nature every year at Wolfridge. Thank you. Thank you to Lane. Thank you for all that have joined us this evening. When we're back open and ready to open the gates, I would love to welcome you all together for something like this in the future. And when we can do so, we'll be the first to let you know that Wolfridge is open and gathering people again here. Yeah, I should say, for those that may have heard Lane reference SMUD, that's me, by the way. And not all may know that, but many do. Thank you. Have a great evening, and I look forward. Join us. We'll send word out and make sure this email group gets invites to our next in this series that we'll be doing for our 50th. Have a great evening, everyone. Bye-bye.